All right, let's dive into a really fascinating puzzle, one that sits at the very core of how our world works. It's a paradox you see in international politics, finance, you name it, and it all boils down to one simple question. I mean, think about it for a second. We're taught that countries are sovereign, right? They're the highest authority, the final boss. So, how in the world can you have rules for the rulers? How can something like international law have any teeth? That's the big question we're digging into today. And this tension, it has a name. We can call it the sovereignty paradox. It's this constant push and pull between a nation's absolute power to rule itself and the binding promises it makes to the rest of the world. So let's get on the same page with our most important term here, state sovereignty. This is really the bedrock principle of the whole global system. It means that, in theory, a country has the final say over everything that happens within its borders. There's no world government, no higher power that can boss it around. And this is where the conflict really heats up. On one hand, you've got sovereignty, this idea of absolute authority. But on the other hand, you have international organizations, think the UN, the World Trade Organization, and their entire purpose for existing is to set rules for those very same states. So how do you make those two things work together? Well, the whole balancing act, the entire system, really hinges on one single incredibly important word: consent. See, international law isn't just handed down from on high. It only exists because states voluntarily agree to it. They consent to be bound by the rules. And it turns out consent isn't just a one-and-done deal. It happens in two key moments. First, there's the big decision to join the club in the first place, to sign the treaty and accept the rulebook. But the second part is just as critical. It's the ongoing, day-to-day choice that countries make about whether they're actually going to follow those rules they agreed to. So, okay, that leads us right to the next big hurdle, what we can call the compliance conundrum. If this whole system is based on choice, what on earth makes a country keep its promises? Right? I mean, there's no world police to show up and arrest a prime minister for breaking a treaty. So why do countries follow international law so often? Why don't they just do whatever they want all the time? Well, the answer isn't about brute force. The real tools are much more subtle. Things like reputation, that's a huge one. No country wants to be known as the one that can't be trusted. You've also got good old-fashioned peer pressure and this genuine desire to be seen as a good international citizen. And maybe most importantly, there's the fear that if you break your promises today, nobody's going to be willing to make a deal with you tomorrow. This quote from the source material just nails it. That simple desire to look good on the world stage, to be seen as a reliable partner. That can be an incredibly powerful force shaping how a country behaves. And if you want some hard evidence, look no further than the International Court of Justice. This is the world's highest court, but get this, it has almost zero power to enforce its decisions, and yet the vast majority of countries that lose a case there actually do what the court says. That just goes to show you how powerful those subtle tools really are. Okay, so consent is the foundation of international law, but it's also the escape hatch. What does that actually look like when the stakes are high? Well, let's dive into a really amazing real-world example. A big fight over fish between Canada and Spain. Okay, let me walk you through this, because it's like a legal thriller. For decades, since 1930, Canada had agreed to let the World Court settle its disputes. But in the early 90s, they started getting really worried about overfishing by European boats. So in 1994, they made a brilliant move. Before anything happened, they quietly changed their agreement with the court. They basically added a footnote saying, by the way, this doesn't apply to our fishing rules. Then, a year later, bam, they seize a Spanish fishing boat. Spain, of course, is furious and takes them to court. But the court just shrugged and said, sorry, we can't hear this case. Why? Because Canada had already withdrawn its consent for this specific issue. This case is just the perfect example of how this all works. Canada didn't really break the law. What they did was they used the rules of consent to their advantage to make sure the law no longer applied to them. They just flipped the switch off. So, you might be thinking, if countries can just opt out like that, what's the point of these rules anyway? Well, it's all part of this constant delicate balancing act we have to do in a world that's so interconnected. And that brings us right back to our main idea, the paradox of sovereignty. It's this one principle that does two completely opposite things. When a country gives its consent, it breathes life into international law. It makes these organizations powerful. But that same principle allows them to withhold or take back their consent, which can pull the rug out from under the whole system. So why should you care about all this? Well, because these organizations are the ones trying to manage the huge global problems that no single country can solve alone. They create the background rules of the road for everyone, and they help define what's normal and what's out of bounds. From global finance to international security, they're right at the heart of it all.
So here's the bottom line. International organizations are not some all-powerful world government, not even close. But they are anything but irrelevant. They live and work in that really interesting, often messy space between what a country promises it will do and what it actually does.
And that leaves us with one final thought to chew on. If a state is free to sign a treaty, to give its word, but is also free to just take that word back, then where does the true power of that treaty really come from?